You weren't single because you weren't chosen. You were single because you would have settled, and God loved you too much to let that happen. Beloved, there's a painful truth many women don't want to hear. Sometimes the reason you've been kept waiting isn't because God forgot about you. It's because in that season, you would have said yes to the wrong person just to stop feeling alone. You would have chosen from loneliness, not from wisdom. You would have accepted breadcrumbs and called it provision, and God, in His mercy, closed doors you were trying to force open not to punish you, but to protect you. By the end of this message, you'll understand 3 signs that you were about to settle and what God was building in you instead. You'll see why the closed doors weren't rejection, but redirection. And you'll finally understand that your singleness wasn't a delay. It was divine intervention. Because here's the truth that will set you free. God didn't delay you. He saved you from settling. Let's begin. And stay until the end, because the 3rd sign is the one that exposes a counterfeit relationship in seconds. 1. You started negotiating with what used to be non-negotiable. There was a time when you knew exactly what you wouldn't tolerate: inconsistency, disrespect, a man who only called when it was convenient, mixed signals, empty promises, half-hearted effort. You had boundaries. You had standards. You had a clear vision of what godly love looked like. But loneliness has a dangerous way of lowering those standards. It whispers in the quiet nights when everyone else seems to be in a relationship. Maybe he'll change. Maybe you're being too picky. Maybe this is as good as it gets. Maybe you should just give him another chance. Maybe your expectations are unrealistic. And suddenly, what used to be a deal breaker became negotiable. What used to be unacceptable became, it's fine for now. What used to make you walk away now makes you stay and explain yourself. You found yourself saying things like, he's going through a lot right now, or he's not really a communicator, or he shows love differently. And while those things might be true, you were using them to justify behavior that didn't align with the Word of God. You were lowering your standards not because God changed His design, but because your loneliness was screaming louder than your discernment. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Guard. That's an active word. It means protect, defend, watch over with intentionality. But when you're desperate to not be alone, you don't guard. You bargain. You compromise. You convince yourself that maybe your standards were too high. Maybe you were expecting too much. Maybe no man is really going to meet all those requirements. God's standards don't change just because you're tired of waiting. His blueprint for covenant doesn't get rewritten because everyone else moved on. And when He sees you about to accept poison in pretty packaging, He intervenes. Not because He's withholding love from you, because He's withholding damage, because He sees what you can't see. He knows that the man you're about to say yes to will drain your peace, confuse your purpose, and delay your destiny. He knows that what looks like love right now is really just loneliness wearing a mask. And because He loves you, He shuts the door. Even when you're beating on it, even when you're crying over it, even when everyone around you is asking why you're still single. Loneliness makes you trade your future for temporary comfort. It makes you accept crumbs and call it a meal. It makes you ignore the chaos because you just want someone to text you, "Good morning." It makes you redefine love as, "At least he's here," instead of, "He's honoring God in how he treats me. That's not love, that's settling. And God will not bless what he did not build. 2. You confused attention with alignment. This is where many women get trapped. He texts nonstop for 2 days, says all the right things, makes you feel chosen, and then goes quiet. He returns like nothing happened. And you mistake intensity for investment. You mistake his words for his character. You mistake chemistry for covenant. You mistake the spark for the substance. But attention is not the same as alignment. A man can give you his time without giving you his truth. He can be present without being consistent. He can say all the right things while his actions tell a completely different story. He can make you feel special in the moment while having no intention of building anything lasting. And if you're not careful, you'll interpret his attention as affection when it's really just attraction. Matthew 7:16 reminds us, "By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Not by their words, not by their potential, not by how good they look on paper, not by how they make you feel when they're paying attention. By their fruit, by what they actually produce over time, by the patterns, not the promises, by the consistency, not the conversation." Look at his life. Does his walk match his talk? Does his consistency match his intensity? Does he have accountability? Does he pursue God when no one is watching, or only when he's trying to impress you? Or are you constantly confused, second-guessing, anxiously waiting for the next text, trying to decode mixed signals, wondering where you stand, feeling like you're always the one initiating, always the one trying to make it work? Because here's what God is teaching you in this season. If you have to constantly question where his heart isn't where it needs to be. Chemistry without character is dangerous. Intensity without integrity is a trap. Attention without alignment will leave you empty. If a man's actions don't line up with his words, you're not dealing with alignment. You're dealing with performance. And God kept you single because 2 years ago, you were about to call that love. The truth is, God is raising your standard for what real alignment looks like. He's teaching you that a man pursuing you should make your life more peaceful, not more chaotic. That godly love doesn't make you anxious. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't leave you wondering if you're too much or not enough. Real alignment brings clarity. It brings consistency. It brings a man who doesn't just talk about his intentions, but demonstrates them through his actions. 3. You were ignoring red flags because you wanted it to work. Red flags don't always look red in the beginning. Sometimes they look pink. Sometimes they look orange. Sometimes they look like he's just going through a tough season, or he's working on himself, or nobody's perfect, right? And you're not wrong. Nobody is perfect. But there's a difference between imperfection and patterns of harm. There's a difference between a man who's growing and a man who's manipulating. If you find yourself constantly explaining his behavior to your friends, that's a red flag. If you're defending him more than he's defining the relationship, that's a red flag. If your peace is gone and you're losing sleep, trying to make sense of his patterns, that's a red flag. If you feel like you're walking on eggshells or constantly adjusting yourself to keep him comfortable, that's a red flag. And here's the painful part. You saw them. You saw the inconsistency. You saw the lack of follow-through. You saw the way he shifted blame. You saw how he treated others when he didn't need something from them. You saw the moments when his character didn't match his words, but you ignored them because you wanted it to work, because you were tired of starting over, because you didn't want to be alone again. But 1 Corinthians 14:33 makes it clear. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. Peace is a sign. Confusion is a warning. When something is truly from God, there's a clarity that comes with it. Not perfection, not the absence of challenge or difficulty, but clarity. You know where you stand. You know his intentions. You're not constantly wondering if he's serious or just passing time. You're not reading between the lines or hoping things will get better once he's in a better place. Peace doesn't mean everything is easy. It means you're not living in fog, and when confusion is the dominant emotion in your relationship, that's God's way of saying, this isn't it. But the version of you from 2 years ago would have stayed anyway. You would have convinced yourself that maybe you were overreacting. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe if you just loved him better, prayed harder, gave him more time, it would all work out. Think of Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. She was married to Nabal, a man whose very name meant fool. The Bible describes him as harsh and evil in his dealings, surly, mean, difficult. And Abigail didn't pretend he was someone he wasn't. She didn't ignore his character flaws or make excuses for his behavior. She saw clearly who he was. And when God removed Nabal from her life, he redirected her path to David, a man after God's own heart. The lesson isn't just about her deliverance, it's about her discernment. She didn't waste years hoping Nabal would change. She didn't compromise her integrity trying to fix a man who didn't want to be fixed. She moved with wisdom, and when the door opened for something better, she was ready. Not bitter, not broken, not clinging to what was familiar just because she feared being alone. She was prepared. That's what God is doing with you. He's sharpening your discernment, so you stop interpreting red flags as areas he's working on. He's teaching you that peace isn't optional in a godly relationship. It's essential. He's showing you that a man's potential means nothing if he's not actively pursuing growth. And he kept you single because the version of you from before would have ignored every warning sign just to avoid another lonely night. So, what was God really doing while you thought he was making you wait? While you thought he was delaying you, he was actually developing you. While you thought he was withholding love, he was teaching you how to recognize it. While you thought you were falling behind, he was pulling you forward into a version of yourself that wouldn't settle for less than his best. God wasn't punishing you with singleness. He was protecting you from a relationship that would have drained you, confused you, compromised your calling, and pulled you away from your purpose. He was saving you from the man who looked good on paper but had no fruit in his life. He was blocking the door you kept knocking on because he saw what was behind it, and it wasn't love. It was a lesson you didn't need to learn the hard way. Every closed door was mercy. Every unanswered prayer was protection. Every situationship that fizzled out was God pulling you back from the edge of a cliff you couldn't see. And while it felt like rejection in the moment, it was really redirection. It was God saying, not that one, not yet, not like this. Because the truth is, you needed to grow. You needed to heal. You needed to stop seeking validation from men and start finding your identity in Christ. You needed to stop filling the void with attention and start filling it with the presence of God. You needed to learn that being alone is not the same as being lonely. That wholeness comes from Him, not from a relationship status. And now, after all this time, after all the closed doors and delayed timelines, you're different. You're not the same woman who would have settled 2 years ago. You don't negotiate your non-negotiables anymore. You don't confuse attention with alignment. You don't ignore red flags just to avoid being alone. You've learned to guard your heart. You've learned to wait for peace, not just chemistry. You've learned that God's no is just as loving as His yes. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not being passed over while everyone else gets chosen. You are being prepared. And the preparation requires that you stop seeing your singleness as rejection and start seeing it as redirection. Because the woman you are becoming will not tolerate what the woman you were would have accepted. God didn't delay you. He saved you from settling. And when God brings the right man into your life, you won't have to convince yourself He's the one. You won't have to ignore red flags or decode mixed signals or negotiate your worth. You won't have to explain to your friends why you're staying or defend His character to yourself. You'll know. Because peace will confirm it, consistency will prove it, and alignment will sustain it. When you stop accepting less, you stop reopening doors God already closed. And that's where peace begins. So let this be your declaration today. I will not settle. If this word touched your spirit, type in the comments, I will not settle. And if this message blessed you, remember to like, subscribe, and share. God bless you.